I hadn't set foot in Briarford since I was 19. The train ride back into town was like traveling through a memory I wasn't sure I wanted to remember. Fields of brittle corn stalks swaying under a pale sky, clusters of leafless trees like black veins against the horizon. Briarford was the kind of place where people still waved at passing cars, not out of friendliness, but because it was expected. It had one grocery store, 2 diners, and a post office that doubled as the town's gossip hub. The air here always smelled faintly of damp earth, like the ground never fully dried after a rain. My grandmother's house sat at the far end of Willow Bend Road, where the asphalt gave way to a narrow strip of gravel. You had to cross an old iron bridge over Miller's Creek to get there. A bridge that groaned under every step, as though it resented the weight. On the other side, the trees grew thicker, bending toward each other until they formed a kind of tunnel. I parked outside and sat in the car for a while, engine ticking as it cooled. The house looked smaller than I remembered, its once bright white paint faded to a tired gray. The curtains in the windows hung heavy, unmoving. My grandmother was gone now, the last living family I had. My parents had died before I could even remember their faces. An accident, they'd said. That word had followed me like a shadow all my life. Some nights, when I was a boy, I'd wake to the sound of murmured voices in the kitchen. I'd hear my name, always spoken in a tone that made me feel like it wasn't meant for me to hear. When I'd ask, Grandma's face would tighten, her eyes darting away. "Go back to bed," she'd say. And that was the end of it. The funeral had been quiet. Too quiet. A handful of people I didn't recognize, their condolences practiced, their eyes already somewhere else. The scent of lilies in the church was thick enough to choke on. When the final shovelful of dirt landed on the coffin, I realized that there was no one left to speak to me, no reason to linger, except for the uneasy pull I felt toward her house. Inside, the air was stale and cool, the kind that clings to old walls. Dust lay over everything like a thin shroud. The grandfather clock in the hallway had stopped at 3:17, its pendulum frozen mid-swing. I drifted from room to room, fingers brushing against objects that seemed smaller, duller than in my memories. The china cabinet with its mismatched cups, the threadbare rug under the dining table, the faded floral wallpaper curling at the corners. When I reached the study, the late afternoon sun was filtering in through the blinds, laying thin bars of light across the oak desk. One drawer was open just enough to invite curiosity. I pulled it the rest of the way, and the smell of paper and cedar met me. Beneath a stack of yellowed letters sat a single cassette tape. The label, written in careful looping script, read, "Ethan, my name." A cassette player sat on the desk as if it had been waiting, its cord trailing into the wall. The sight of it made something in my chest tighten. I picked up the tape, feeling its weight heavier than it should have been. My thumb brushed over the label. I slid it into the player, the plastic clicking into place, and pressed play. There was a hiss of static, then her voice. Soft, a little shaky, but close, as though she were sitting across from me. "Ethan, if you're hearing this, then I'm gone. I didn't want to tell you while I was alive. I didn't want to see your face when you learned the truth." The chair groaned under me as I sat, leaning closer to the speaker. "You were told your parents died in a car accident. That wasn't true. They didn't die. Not exactly. They were taken." I felt the blood leave my face. The night they disappeared. There was a knock at the door. Your father answered it. There was a man standing there in the rain. He wore a black coat, and his eyes, he never blinked. His voice was calm, but his words were wrong, like someone had learned them from a book without knowing what they meant. He said he'd come for a debt that could only be paid in blood. The tape crackled, and for a moment I thought it had stopped. But then she continued, her voice quieter now, like she didn't want to be overheard. Your father tried to shut the door, but the man stepped inside. I didn't see what happened next. There was a sound, like the air being sucked out of the room. When I ran to the door, they were gone, your mother, your father, and the man. The floor was wet, but there was no rain inside. My throat felt dry. I thought it was over, until the night you turned 5. I woke to find you standing in the hallway, whispering in a voice that wasn't yours. You said, "He's still hungry." You didn't remember it the next morning. But I knew. I knew the debt wasn't paid. I hovered over the stop button, my finger trembling. But I couldn't press it. If you stay in Briarford tonight, you'll see him. He doesn't age. He doesn't leave until he gets what he's owed. And Ethan, I think he came for you that night. But I gave him something else instead. I gave him your parents. The tape clicked off. The room was too quiet. The shadows on the wall had grown longer, stretching like dark fingers. I sat there, staring at the player, until I noticed the light outside had faded completely. Then came the sound. 3 slow knocks at the front door. I froze. Not a neighbor. Not here. Not at this hour. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to see. A figure stood at the edge of the porch. Black coat, still as stone. Even through the glass, his eyes were pale and fixed on me, unblinking. And though I couldn't hear him, I knew exactly what he was saying. The debt wasn't over. I didn't move. My hand stayed on the curtain, fingers tightening until my knuckles ached. The figure on the porch didn't shift, didn't breathe. The black coat hung straight, unmoved by the wind, though the trees outside swayed. I blinked once, and his eyes were still on mine, pale and fixed like glass marbles. Then came the sound again. 3 knocks, slow, measured. I stepped back from the window, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. My mind scrambled for logic. Maybe it was a prank, maybe someone had the wrong house. But the weight in the air told me otherwise. The phone in my pocket felt like a lifeline. I pulled it out, only to see the screen flicker, glitch, and go black. No signal. From the porch, a shadow slipped across the window, the shape of a head turning as though scanning the room. Then, from somewhere deep inside the house, came the faint click of the cassette player. It had been off. I turned toward the study. The room was darker now, though I hadn't switched off the lamp. The cassette was still inside, spinning slowly, though I hadn't pressed play. Her voice returned, but it was different this time, faster, urgent. "Ethan, listen to me. You cannot open the door. Not for him. Once you see his face through the glass, it's already too late. But if you let him in, there's no undoing it." I froze in the doorway. He's patient. He's been patient for years. The debt, it moves down the bloodline if it's not paid. I thought I'd stopped it, but I only delayed it. The front door rattled. The knocks had stopped, replaced by the slow turn of the doorknob. "Do not speak to him, Ethan. If you speak, you invite him." The sound of the knob stopped. Silence swallowed the house whole. Then, footsteps. Not outside. Inside. I spun around, scanning the hallway. The shadows seemed thicker, darker than they should have been, shapes bending in ways they didn't before. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the living room. A figure stood there, just beyond the edge of the light, taller than the doorway. His face was wrong, blurred, as though I were seeing it through rippling water. My breath caught. Then he spoke, and the sound made the air feel heavy in my lungs. Your grandmother lied. It wasn't a voice. It was a pressure, like a thought pressed into my skull. They didn't give me your parents. They ran. She gave me you. I stumbled backward into the study. The cassette whirred faster, the tape spinning so quickly it should have snapped. Her voice returned one last time, but now it was almost a whisper. If you hear me, leave the house. The figure in the living room didn't move, but the shadows around him began to stretch, reaching across the floor toward me like spilling ink. I grabbed the cassette player without thinking, yanked the tape free, and ran to the kitchen. My fingers fumbled at the back door, the key sticking in the lock before finally turning. The night air was cold, sharp. I sprinted down Willow Bend Road, gravel crunching under my shoes, until the house was just a dark silhouette behind me. Only when I reached the old stone bridge did I slow down. My lungs burned, my hands trembled. I looked back. Nothing but quiet darkness. Then I glanced down at the cassette still clutched in my hand. It was gone. In its place was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age, with handwriting I recognized immediately. It was my mother's. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means he's found you. Do not go back, ever. I looked toward the trees at the edge of the road, and there, between the trunks, stood the man in the black coat. Closer than before, he didn't move toward me. He didn't need to. Somehow, deep down, I knew, no matter where I ran, I'd hear the tape play again. And when it did, it would be the last thing I ever heard. If this story unsettled you, leave a like and let the shadows know. Subscribe for more tales you shouldn't hear after dark. And if you've seen something you can't explain, tell us in the comments. We're always listening.